Jack the Ripper, the mysterious serial killer whose identity has long remained a mystery.
DNA from a shawl recovered at the scene of one of his crimes has incredibly found a 100% match.
Jack the Ripper, the most infamous killer in history, a phantom who stalked the gaslit alleys of 19th century London and vanished into legend. For over a century, his identity remained the ultimate cold case. But now, science has done what Victorian detectives couldn't. DNA evidence has confirmed his name after 137 years. The Jack the Ripper case, once thought unsolvable, may finally be closed. And it's not a royal. It's not a doctor. It's not who you think. This is not a theory. It's not internet speculation. This is based on actual forensic science. A modern investigation using DNA extracted from a 137-year-old piece of cloth, a bloodstained shawl found at the scene of one of the Ripper's brutal crimes. This overlooked relic has unlocked a truth buried in time. But what nobody tells you is how this clue was dismissed for decades, how the police always suspected the man science just confirmed, and how the killer walked free because society failed its most vulnerable. To understand this moment, we have to go back to where it all began, the fall of 1888, East London, a district called Whitechapel, where desperation clung to every soot-covered brick. Thousands of people crammed into filthy alleys. The stench of poverty, the smog of coal smoke, and the ever-present fear of violence. For 5 women, that fear became reality. They were poor, homeless, forgotten by society, and one by one, they were slaughtered in the fog. The first was Mary Ann Nichols, August 31st. Her throat was cut so deeply it nearly severed her head. Just a week later, Annie Chapman was found in a backyard with her abdomen torn open. Then came Elizabeth Stride and Catherine Eddowes, both murdered within the same hour on the same night. And finally, Mary Jane Kelly, discovered mutilated beyond recognition in her own room. The murders weren't just brutal, they were surgical, precise. The media speculated wildly. Was it a mad doctor, a prince, a foreigner with dark motives? The theories spread faster than the fear, and in the chaos, one truth was buried. The killer knew the streets. He blended in, he chose his victims carefully, and then he vanished. The police were overwhelmed. They had no forensics, no DNA, no fingerprints. Their best tools were sketchy witness statements and crude sketches. And while detectives scoured the slums, one blood-soaked clue was quietly pocketed by an officer and taken home. A shawl. It had been found beside Catherine Eddowes' body in Mitre Square, stained with blood and something else. No one paid it much attention. It was never entered into official evidence. It passed from hand to hand, forgotten, until it resurfaced more than a century later in the most unexpected way. In 2007, a man named Russell Edwards bought the shawl at auction. A true crime obsessive, he believed it could still hold the answers no one had found. Most dismissed it as a macabre souvenir, contaminated, irrelevant. But Edwards had a plan. He contacted Dr. Jari Luhalainen, a molecular biologist with expertise in ancient DNA. Their mission? Extract mitochondrial DNA from a 19th century silk shawl. It sounded impossible. The fabric had been touched by countless people. It was exposed to air, light, time. But DNA, especially mitochondrial DNA, can be surprisingly durable. Unlike nuclear DNA, which combines genes from both parents, mitochondrial DNA is passed down solely through the mother's line. It forms an unbroken genetic chain stretching back generations, and that's exactly what made it useful. Dr. Luhalainen got to work. He and his team focused on 2 types of biological residue: blood, believed to be from the victim, and semen, potentially from the killer. They extracted trace samples and amplified the mitochondrial sequences. Then they tracked down 2 living women. One was descended from Catherine Eddowes' maternal line, the other from a known suspect's maternal line. What happened next was astonishing. The DNA from the shawl matched both descendants. One sequence confirmed that the blood was Eddowes. The other matched the lineage of a suspect, long overlooked by history. The match was strong, statistically significant, and it pointed to a man the police had quietly suspected all along. His name was Aaron Kosminski, not a doctor, not a royal, a 23-year-old Polish immigrant who worked as a barber. He lived in the heart of Whitechapel. He was known to be mentally unstable, violent, paranoid. His family even had him institutionalized just 2 years after the murders stopped. And while he was never charged, top investigators had placed him at the top of their list in 1894. One memo from Chief Constable Melville McNaughton named him outright. He described Kosminski as having strong homicidal tendencies. Another officer, Chief Inspector Donald Swanson, wrote in the margins of his own notes that Kosminski was indeed the killer, identified, watched, but never prosecuted. And now, 137 years later, DNA backed up those suspicions. So why wasn't he arrested? Here's where it gets darker. In Victorian England, a man couldn't be arrested without hard evidence. There were no blood tests, no lab results. If a witness refused to testify, or if a jury didn't understand mental illness, a murderer could walk free. And Kosminski, he was committed to an asylum in 1891. He died there, alone, forgotten. While Jack the Ripper's legend grew, the real man may have been locked away, hiding in plain sight within padded walls. The police were close. They had his name. They knew he was dangerous, but they didn't have what they needed. And so the killing stopped. The fear faded, but the mystery endured until now. What are the odds that the shawl would survive? That the DNA could still be read? That a living descendant could be found? It's almost poetic. A ghost story told through genetics. A whisper of blood passed from mother to daughter across generations. Now echoing from a stained piece of fabric. But is the case really closed? That depends on who you ask. Some scientists argue that the DNA could have been contaminated, that the shawl's chain of custody is too messy, that without a sealed crime scene, it's impossible to be certain. Critics point out that mitochondrial DNA can only narrow a suspect pool, not identify one person beyond all doubt. And yet, the match is there. The location, the timing, the suspect, all aligned. So what do we do with that? The most chilling part of this story isn't just that science may have found the Ripper. It's that he was never really hiding. He was right there, a face in the crowd, a man dismissed by history because he didn't fit the myth. No top hat, no scalpel, just a troubled soul slipping through the cracks of a broken system. But was he really the killer? Or is the real Jack the Ripper still out there, laughing from the shadows of time? To understand how Kosminski escaped justice, you have to understand Whitechapel. London in 1888 was two cities. The West End was full of grandeur, horse-drawn carriages, gas light balls, and polished boots. But the East End, that was something else entirely. Whitechapel was a maze of misery. Nearly 1 million people crammed into a few square miles of slums, sweatshops, and alleyways. Streets weren't just dark. They were black, choked in yellow fog and coal smoke, thick as soup, clinging to your lungs and hiding everything from view. This wasn't just a dangerous place. It was a perfect hunting ground, and someone was hunting. The lodging houses were the heart of it, packed 10 to a room, or worse, dozens sleeping upright in a single space, back to back, shoulder to shoulder. Women paid pennies for a bed, or even just a rope to lean on, and when they couldn't afford it, they walked the streets. That's what made them targets. They weren't sex workers by choice. They were poor, desperate, and alone. The Ripper didn't strike high society. He went after the invisible. And the police, they were overwhelmed. Most officers had nothing but a whistle and a truncheon. No radios, no organized crime scene protocol. When a body was found, crowds would rush in, contaminating everything. Reporters trampled through evidence. Children played near bloodstains. It was chaos, and it got worse. After the double murder of Stride and Edowes on the same night, police found a piece of Edowes' apron in a doorway. Above it, someone had written a chilling message in chalk. "The Jews are the men that will not be blamed for nothing." Was it a clue? A threat? A taunt? No one knows. Fearing riots, Commissioner Sir Charles Warren ordered the message erased immediately. One of the few physical clues ever found. Gone forever. Erased in the name of order. Meanwhile, the media went wild. When a letter arrived at a news agency, signed Jack the Ripper, it made headlines across the world. The name stuck. The myth grew. The letter was likely fake, written by a journalist to sell papers. But it worked. Soon, the public was obsessed with fantasies of doctors, dukes, and mad aristocrats. While the police quietly narrowed in on Kosminski, the world chased shadows. And Kosminski? He unraveled. Witnesses said he muttered to himself, that he feared food was being poisoned, that he hated women. One woman claimed he attacked her with a knife, but was stopped just in time. Police surveilled him. Doctors evaluated him. But in the end, they had no proof. In 1891, his family had him committed to Colney Hatch Lunatic Asylum. He remained there for decades. And just like that, the killings stopped. No more mutilated bodies in alleys. No more bloodied shawls. No more terror in the fog. Jack the Ripper disappeared as suddenly as he arrived. Most people assumed he fled, or died, or had been a high-ranking official protected by power. Few suspected the truth might be much simpler, that the Ripper had been locked away, that he died not in a blaze of justice, but in a padded room, forgotten by history. That's the power of myth. It blinds us to reality. Kosminski was poor, Jewish, mentally ill, not exactly the stuff of legend, so the world looked past him, chose fancier suspects, romantic villains, but the files were there, the notes, the memos, Inspector Swanson's handwriting, naming him, McNogden's statement, pointing at him, and now, 137 years later, a blood-stained shawl silently confirmed what they already knew. But this isn't the end of the story, because just as the world began to accept the DNA findings, critics emerged. Geneticists, historians, crime writers, all asking the same question. Can we trust 137-year-old evidence? The shawl, after all, was never officially logged by police. It was allegedly taken by a constable and handed down through his family. It spent decades in private hands, touched, displayed, moved. Who knows how many people handled it? Could the DNA have come from one of them? Could it have been a descendant? Or someone completely unrelated? Russell Edwards and Dr. Lauhelainen say no. They argue that the DNA sequences were carefully isolated, uncontaminated, and matched with rare mitochondrial haplotypes. That the odds of a coincidental match are vanishingly small. That both the victim's DNA and the suspect's DNA appearing on the same shawl, in the same stains, at the same time, is beyond coincidence. But not everyone agrees. Peer review of the study was limited. The full data was not published in a major scientific journal. Some experts argue that mitochondrial DNA alone is not conclusive, that it can rule people out, but not definitively rule one person in. That without nuclear DNA, or better crime scene control, no suspect can be named with absolute certainty. And so, even with science on the table, the myth endures. Maybe that's human nature. We like unsolved mysteries. We like imagining Jack the Ripper as a mastermind, a villain out of a Gothic novel. To accept that he was just a troubled young man from the neighborhood, no cape, no crown, feels unsatisfying. But maybe that's exactly why he got away with it. Because we weren't looking at the truth. The truth was poor, awkward, unremarkable, but dangerous. Kosminski matched the timeline. He matched the geography. He matched the profile. And now he may match the DNA. If all of that is true, the case is over. The Ripper was not a mystery. He was a man, known to police, watched, committed, and forgotten. But the question remains, should we accept this? Or are we still, even now, chasing shadows? If Kosminski was the Ripper, then history owes those women, and the world, an apology. Because the clues were there all along. They just weren't believed. Not by the public, not by the media, and in the end, not even by some of the investigators themselves. Let's look again at what we know. He lived in Whitechapel, within walking distance of every murder. He was mentally ill, prone to violent outbursts, and known to harbor deep resentment toward women. The police at the time named him directly. One senior officer claimed they had even identified him using a witness, possibly a fellow Jewish immigrant, who saw Kosminski with one of the victims moments before her death. But the witness refused to testify, afraid perhaps of becoming a target himself. Without that testimony, the police had nothing solid, no confession, no weapon, no trial. So Kosminski was watched, then quietly placed in an asylum. The killing stopped, but the myth didn't. And that may be the most disturbing part of this story. Because what if the legend of Jack the Ripper actually protected him? What if turning a poor Polish barber into a ghost, a monster, a mystery, actually kept him safe? The more the public imagined a cloaked aristocrat or rogue surgeon, the more invisible the real man became. It wasn't just misdirection, it was misbelief. For over a century, the name Aaron Kosminski sat in dusty archives, buried beneath louder suspects with more glamour. Names like Prince Albert Victor, or the painter Walter Sickert, or the barrister Montague Druitt. These men made headlines. They fit the drama. But none had DNA on the shawl. None were identified in writing by multiple officers on the original case. And none were committed to an asylum at precisely the moment the killing stopped. Kosminski was, and yet, doubt lingers. In 2019, when the new DNA findings were published in the Journal of Forensic Sciences, the backlash was immediate. Critics pounced on the lack of transparency. The data wasn't fully peer-reviewed. Some argued that the match, though statistically rare, wasn't rare enough to be conclusive. Others pointed out that mitochondrial DNA only identifies maternal lineage, that multiple people could share similar profiles. Russell Edwards stood by the results. He called the case closed. He said the DNA, the historical accounts, and the timeline all converged on one man. That after 137 years, there was finally closure. But science isn't always about final answers. It's about probabilities. And the most probable truth is still unsettling. Because even if Kosminski was the killer, there's a deeper question we have to ask. Why was he allowed to roam free? Why did 5 women have to die before anything was done? The answer lies in the world they lived in. A world that didn't value the lives of poor women, that ignored the mentally ill, that failed to connect the dots not because the clues were missing, but because no one wanted to believe the monster could be so ordinary. The Ripper didn't vanish. He was simply overlooked. And that should haunt us more than any shadowy figure in a top hat. Because this story isn't really about Jack the Ripper. It's about Mary Ann Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, Mary Jane Kelly. 5 women whose names were nearly erased by the fame of their killer. 5 lives reduced to footnotes in a murder mystery. But they weren't just victims. They were mothers, sisters, friends. They laughed, they cried, they mattered, and they deserved justice, not legend. So what now? Do we accept the DNA? Do we close the case? Or do we leave the door open? Here's the uncomfortable truth. Even with modern science, the past is murky. Evidence is fragile. Memory fades. And sometimes, even facts can feel incomplete. The shawl might be real. The DNA might be accurate. The match might be enough. But in the end, it's not the lab that decides. It's us. We choose what stories to believe. And for over a century, we believed in the myth. Now, we have a chance to believe in something harder, something more human. That the Ripper wasn't a ghost or a genius or a gentleman. He was a man. Broken, violent, and ignored. And in a different time, with better science, maybe he would have been caught. Maybe lives would have been saved. But that didn't happen. And so, the question remains, is this the truth we've been waiting for? Or is the real Jack the Ripper still out there, hidden not in the shadows, but in the story we've told ourselves for 137 years? Let us know what you think. And remember, the past never really sleeps.